Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Davidson, and I'm a Senior Vice President for Strategic Accounts here at EverFi. I'm super pleased that you're spending the next 45 minutes with me, and I am excited to be sharing this information with you as you all look at ascertaining your existing efforts with faculty and staff, specifically around compliance training. And welcome the opportunity to demonstrate how EverFi can help you all achieve your goals. To that end, it's just going to be me today on the phone. My partner in crime, George Homer, was actually delayed in flight and is not in a position to participate in today's call. I will share with you that my colleague Michele is recording this experience for us, and within a day or two you will receive a recording and the slide deck in the event that you want to share it with your colleagues on campus and or review the presentation again on your own time. So we are scheduled to take about 40-45 minutes today. Encourage you, if you do have questions, to lob them into the question box, just as you help Michele understand if our technology was working appropriately, and we'll be sure to respond to those accordingly as we go through the presentation or in follow-up, certainly. So to that end, we'll go ahead and get started today. So I'm really coming off of the heels of a super exciting event at EverFi. It was a pretty monumental experience in the company's history, in which we actually hosted our first annual Campus Prevention Network Summit just this week on Monday and Tuesday in Boston, where we had over 500 individuals representing 375 institutions, ranging from practitioner roles to prevention health experts, to human resource managers, to provosts, to senior administrators in student affairs. And I think that the size and scope of that event, and particularly the individuals who were involved in it, really speaks to the complexity of the work that you all are doing on your campuses now. And I encourage you, not as a plug, but as a resource, to consider going out to our website, which is campuspreventionnetwork.com. And we've just recently launched our Facebook page, as you can there see on the screen. And what we're really doing is sort of creating a significant network, if you will, around institutions and compliance and prevention training, and we hope you take advantage of the resources that we're providing that range from white papers to webinars, and certainly some of the sessions that were represented by some of your peers and experts in the field will be hosted on the Campus Prevention Network site, and we certainly recommend that you take a look at that. To that end, one of the things that we've learned over the course of the past 6 or 7 months, and certainly from literally the hundreds of conversations that we had over a couple of days being on campus, is that the complexity and the need for looking and examining the issues that you all are supporting as institutions, as individuals, is really critical to now institutional priorities, that it's no longer just a matter of a programmatic experience, but it's really looking at a whole host of institutional priorities and thinking about how education and how technology and serving it in a very scalable way can actually help inform your decisions. And well, those are represented by, the likes of Holly Ryder-Milkovich and Peter Lake at the summit earlier this week. We understand that each institution is certainly unique in nature and specific to their own individual institution, how they represent and how they incorporate these into that perspective. And so today we're really going to be examining how we can actually help you do that. And at the very least of it, one of the things that we would love for you to walk away from today with is that our mission as an organization is really to think about how we help schools drive lasting, long-scale change, around a host of critical and really critical and sensitive issues on campuses, whether we're talking about alcohol prevention or sexual assault or diversity or data security. We're really thinking about how, from a technology perspective, that we can actually help you all synthesize and create a community to share those best practices, and really thinking about how we can help inform and create really effective population level programs and help you all think about assessments from a benchmarking perspective, and ultimately creating a community that has a shared commitment to the campus health and safety measures that we're all trying to achieve. So I thought I'd begin today by really sharing some of the trends that we're seeing, and some of the things that we've taken away from the summit, and from the 1,700 institutions that we currently work with, and recognizing that some of you on this call we work with in some capacity, perhaps more with some than others. But really, what we have now is this really interesting and unique capability of being able to identify trends. And one of those biggest issues is sadly this massive epidemic that we're seeing that may have seemingly been beneath the surface, but ultimately what we're now seeing is across the population, and that what we're really been tasked with and charged by our institutions to think about how we address this is this issue around pharmaceutical drug and opioid abuse. I had the pleasure of actually going through the demo of this course that's going to be set to release at the beginning of July, and it's really meant for institutions to consider how they actually support the community that they're serving, and we recognize that this is an issue that touches everybody, faculty, staff, and students, and that's certainly one of the things that we're seeing from a trend perspective, where institutions are asking for this. And we have recently seen, as a matter of fact, state legislation requiring institutions, public institutions, the state of Maryland, to provide prevention education around pharmaceutical and opioid drug use, and wouldn't be surprised if we start to see other state legislatures replicate that effort. The other thing that we're seeing, and this has been one that's also been sort of percolating for the past 2.5 to 3 years, and it's really this perspective of diversity and inclusion on campus. And interestingly enough, there's a concept of being able to address this, at a population level, and really starting to examine the specific sort of climate on your particular campus. And we're seeing this sort of issue being floated up by a wide variety of folks on campus, not only from those who interact on a daily basis from students, but also from campus leadership like provosts and presidents, where the conversations around diversity and inclusion really are being elevated, and certainly recognizing that they are impacting institutional priorities like enrollment and retention. And so when we really think about how EverFi can actually support this, it's really from that perspective of, again, of how we can put together a programmatic experience or content experience for institutions to be able to address this at a scalable perspective, and ultimately learn something in a way that perhaps maybe you wouldn't have been able to at such scale, and to help inform your ongoing work, recognizing that the benefit of using technology and being able to support these issues is also being able to get a particular perspective that you may not ever have otherwise. So to that end, I think it's really interesting to sort of examine where we have been over the past 6 years. I've had the pleasure of working with EverFi from the very sort of beginning of their work in higher education, when they acquired their first company 6 years ago. And at that point, we were having very different conversations with institutions around health and wellness. And it seemed to sort of percolate really around the programmatic experience, and why that's still very critically important to ensure that the content aligns with prevention best practice, and ultimately some of the compliance perspectives that institutions now have. That's really where we consider like an institution sort of being in a crawl phase, and recognizing that over the past 3 years, many institutions have been able to shore up their prevention and compliance measurements, so that they're not just training new students, but now ultimately training new employees, and they're effectively reaching those goals. But when we really think about sort of the stages of expansion, where we think sort of the perspective of compliance and training can actually be, what we're starting to see now is institutions really think about actionable data analysis, and really being able to do, for example, some benchmarking and cross across their campus community, and being able to better understand, for example, how do you support underserved populations and how underserved populations may be experiencing different things on campus. And then we're certainly seeing institutions start to examine their efforts on an ongoing perspective, not only just to be in line with Title IX and Clery requirements from a compliance perspective, but ultimately from a prevention and education best practice as well. And when you think about the complexity of actually having to train not just your incoming population for faculty and staff and students, but it's also about the ongoing perspective. You really have to begin to think about how technology can serve to support that because of the limited resources and, quite frankly, limited time that we all have. And then with that comes additional scale in terms of outcomes and benchmarking and being able to represent to the president, to provost, or to the board, ultimately the nature of your assessment and the strengths of your community and where you ultimately should dedicate additional resources. And then we start to really get into some really interesting perspectives if we're looking at, sort of a forward or future perspective when we're thinking about institutions that can be or are running. And that perspective is really having to look at automated role-based training plans. We have a lot of institutions who were at the summit earlier this week starting to really think about how you curriculize an experience, whether that's particularly for faculty and staff or students, but it's really this ongoing integrated student approach that we're seeing a lot of institutions now consider. To that end, we recognize that this is pretty complex, recognizing that by nature, a lot of our institutions that we work with are decentralized, more so than some, but ultimately we may be in a position, for example, where we are working with you with Title IX and Clery, but maybe not perhaps around data security or diversity. And we recognize that by the very nature, and in some cases, for the benefit, institutions are decentralized, but we're also starting to see this trend where there is a need for institutions to aggregate their training under one umbrella and ultimately to be able to designate the appropriate content when necessary. And so that's not to say or represent that's easier said than done. We recognize I have these conversations on a daily basis, but what we're seeing is a lot of institutions actually coming back to the table and thinking about how they can leverage their relationships from an existing partner perspective and have a central repository for the training, given the fact that compliance and training have become institutional priorities. So when we think about where we were and how we came along that continuum, if you will, this really started back in 2011 when the Dear Colleague letter was issued and ultimately was encoded into the VAWA amendments under Clery. And it's interesting to note that the conversations that we were having 3 or 4 years ago, again, were really focused on the programmatic experience, ensuring that whether the faculty or staff or the student population that we were talking about would feel engaged by the content, that it met all of the compliance requirements from a policy perspective. And what we're seeing now is institutions pulling back and really examining that programmatic experience and really thinking about the broader requirements from Clery to ensure that the programs that they're putting in front of their populations are comprehensive and intentional, certainly are informed by the research and assessed for outcomes, recognizing that in order to continue to, in a process of improvement, that you have to be able to understand the impact of your existing efforts. And we also recognize that the experiences that you're putting in front of your population need to be appropriate, recognizing that institutions that may represent community colleges versus four-year institutions have very different demographics that they're serving, and ultimately that the experiences that you're putting in front of your faculty and staff should reflect that appropriately. And to that end, we think about the involvement of prevention, and it's been a really interesting experience for us at EverFi, and sort of the full circle where we've actually been in terms of compliance versus prevention best practice. And what we recognize is that one actually can strengthen the other, that without policy, it's very hard to engage folks in prevention education, but without prevention education, it's very hard to actually achieve the ultimate intent of the legislation that we have. And none of us should actually be surprised that the information or the requirements within the legislation, specifically to Title IX and Clery, do align with prevention best practice. And that's because they were informed by leading experts in the field. Holly Ryder-Milkovich, formerly of University of Michigan, who now actually is leading EverFi's efforts in sexual assault prevention education, sat on that negotiated rulemaking committee, and she and her esteemed colleagues recognized that these were very systemic issues that we're ultimately trying to address as a community, and that brief single dosage programs do lack sustained impact. And so in their foresight, they incorporated the best practice in prevention education to ensure that institutions and otherwise were really looking at these issues in a very critical, systematic perspective. And so when we think about the role of online education, and we think about the task at hand institutionally to actually train hundreds, if not thousands, of folks on an annual basis, we really have to start thinking about how that online training can actually serve to support and provide a baseline to the supplemental efforts on your campuses, and certainly be able to provide data to help inform ongoing work on your campuses. This work is also being guided by a whole group of individuals who form the White House Task Force. And in our conversation with Peter Lake earlier this week, he provided a plenary session for EverFi. He made a point that to mention this guidebook, and while he lamented that it was a shame that the guidebook was issued just a couple of weeks into the beginning of January, because it ultimately seemed to get lost in the shuffle of what was happening on a national perspective during that month, that the information for college presidents and chancellors and seniors administrators is still very current and very relevant, and provides a great framework for institutions to consider, to think about how they actually protect the institution, and provide some perspective around a campus-wide initiative. And if you all have had a chance to take a look at that, that's great. If not, we can actually provide it as a resource. But what I think is one of the interesting things about this guidebook is that the number 2 recommendation by those who wrote the publication was to provide annual training for university college administrators at all levels across not only incoming, but on an annual ongoing perspective as well. To that end, EverFi has really looked at how we could actually support our institutions to be a good partner in helping institutions meet their compliance and prevention priorities. And the first step of this is really to address the content that we're providing institutions. And many of you are joining the call as an existing EverFi partner. Many of you are joining the call as an existing or primary partner with Law Room and Campus Clarity, and perhaps maybe some of you are also representing Workplace Answers clients. And through the series of acquisitions that EverFi has made, we now have had an opportunity to consolidate the services and really think about how we achieve scale, not just in the communities and the campuses that we're serving, but ultimately how we start to build a lot of opportunity within the courses that we all are offering, and how we continue to inform the work that we're doing, very similar to the way that I represented our information, or sort of the trending need for opioid prevention education or diversity inclusion education. So to that end, this is a simplified sample of our faculty and staff catalog, and certainly we can provide the full scope of the catalog in our follow-up to you. But effectively what you're seeing here is a construct that is applicable to our faculty and staff catalog, as well as our student catalog, where we have very specific primary prevention courses for Title IX, Clery, certainly for harassment, discrimination, and retaliation. And then we have supporting courses. And what I would love to do is draw your attention to the ongoing Title IX and Clery course that we have represented here, that was created and aligns with Title IX and Clery mandates around annual ongoing education, allowing institutions to provide a basis, a framework, a cornerstone around some of these critical issues, and then on an annual ongoing basis, deliver education to your community in a way that's succinct. It's about 20 minutes versus an hour long of our primary prevention courses, and is iterated annually so that ultimately from a training best practice perspective and from a faculty and staff perspective, an opportunity to engage your learner in a way that doesn't have them go through the very same course on an annual basis. And then you'll also see, a list of other compliance-related training efforts. The course of our conversations over the past 6 months have really been elevated to not only include content around Title IX and Clery, but also accommodating disabilities, recognizing that behind Title IX complaints, OCR receives complaints around disabilities and institutions accommodating those with disabilities. And then ultimately also data security is being sort of a growing interest institutionally, recognizing that there have been a number of institutions that have either had data breaches or otherwise resulting in personal information being exposed or significant financial loss. This is just a reflection of our student courses, recognizing that some of you on the line may also be responsible for student training on your campuses if you're wearing multiple hats. Very similar to the way that you've seen our faculty and staff course, that we have a context of primary prevention courses, and then also annual ongoing courses for students. And in this case, we actually have a diversification around Title IX and Clery for your traditional four-year first-time student to graduates to adult learners and community college students, recognizing that what we're trying to do is support a broad array of institutions, not just traditional four-year institutions. And then to that end, the next step of this is we're really sort of thinking back to the construct of the crawl, walk, run mentality. We have to start thinking about the critical functionality that as a technology platform and as a technology organization we can support institutions with. And it's really around the whole host of other perspectives that institutions bring to the table now. And I can represent being and having these conversations for over 6 years now with a wide variety of institutions that 6 years ago, these were not part of the conversations. But from a fundamental perspective, these are part of the very first conversations we are now having with institutions. If a vendor doesn't fit or identify in the scope of being able to work with institutions across these critical functional areas, it's not likely that those conversations are going to extend for very long. And it's because these have become critical elements from an institutional perspective to go from being able to deliver content to all students to being able to do it from administratively from a functional perspective. And so when we think about what those are, it certainly represents that our courses meet the highest standard of accessibility. A lot of institutions are now very keen in ensuring that all of their online experiences meet the highest standards represented by the American Disabilities Act. And then we think about automated email reminders. I certainly know that institutionally you all are being charged to do more with less, and having to remember to send an email out to your faculty and staff who've not completed the training on a Friday afternoon is probably not on your short list. And so we've created systems that allow you to be able to automate that functionality. 6 years ago, institutions were not concerned about capturing electronic policy signatures, and now if you don't have it, it's a non-starter. And this has really become a pretty critical part of ensuring sort of a mitigating risk, if you will, for institutions to be able to assess and ascertain if an individual has received and accepted the policy, and our systems actually allow you to do that. Which speaks to sort of maintaining training records. So, we're no longer in the days where an Excel spreadsheet or a paper list in a file are going to represent best practice institutionally. And so when we really think about how you maintain those records indefinitely and available in the real time in the event of an internal or external audit, becomes pretty critical to the conversation that you're having in assessing the vendor. And then the last piece of this, which is really interesting to me, it's about an institution doing a deeper dive, and it's typically not the primary point of person that we have conversations with. So these conversations typically are happening when we dig in a little bit deeper with the offices of information technology, as they have started to provide a construct of best practices for their institution and how they actually partner with SaaS-based organizations to ensure that they're actually following best practices, that their systems and services are actually being audited on a pretty frequent basis rather, to ensure that the information and the systems that we are providing to you remain in place and accurate, and that there's no threat of a data breach. To that end, data integration and automation is becoming more critical, and I think this is because institutions are becoming more sort of technology savvy themselves, incorporating other SaaS-based processes, whether that's an LMS or an HRS system, and really thinking about how you can take away some of the administrative burden from an individual to have them concentrate more on strategic services for their institution versus administrative services. So when we think about what that looks like, it sort of represents being able to identify the 4 or 5 courses that you want every single new faculty and staff member to go through, and being able to automatedly assign those courses. And then we also think about how, once those are complete, they can be fed back into your records and check a box so that you all can run a report and be able to provide that information to the identified manager or the provost or otherwise. And then we also think about the learner experience from the perspective of engaging the content. And many of our institutions are now defining a single sign-on as their sort of choice process with it, so that an individual doesn't have to create a separate username and password, reducing, quite frankly, the administrative burden as well to maintain that process, but to give the end consumer a better experience as well. So now, sort of talking about deployment and assessment, this has become, again, a really interesting perspective where we're no longer just talking about content, but we're talking about process. What we've designed is an LMS to really support administrators in a really efficient and effective way. And we continue to improve upon this as we continue to examine the experience not only our administrators are having, but our end users are as well. And so we can do this a number of different ways, but through an LMS deployment, we can actually identify that population and the courses that you may want to assign. And this can be assigned from a functional perspective, depending upon where they may work on your campus, or if it's something that is actually supposed to be delivered population-wide. And you can schedule that training and that communication cadence in advance. Again, really thinking more strategically about your events versus having to pop into the system on a Wednesday afternoon to identify that communication cadence, for example. And then it's really about tracking and reporting as well, being able to track where the learner is in progress in the course and being able to report in real time. Again, from a perspective of either an internal or external audit purposes, you want to ensure that the data that we're collecting is accurate and reflective of your tremendous efforts that you're undertaking to maintain the training priorities on your campus. And then to that end, you know, we recognize that usage data is really critical. It's certainly critical as a measurement of success, critical for a measurement of compliance from a perspective of good faith and being able to demonstrate that you've done everything that you can to provide appropriate information to your population. But we also think about data in a way that's going to help you identify areas for improvement, and also the strengths of your community, recognizing that you need to leverage those strengths in order to improve the areas in which you have identified for improvement. An example of this is being able to, for example, ascertain if your members of your community who belong to perhaps a minority demographic, if they're experiencing some of these issues in a different way than the majority, and if so, what can you actually do as a community or as an organization or as a department to be able to help those particular individuals? And so what you're seeing here is some just reflection of some of those, that type of information that we can provide. And it's really, what's interesting for us as an organization is really, this is where that power of that network comes in, where we have an ability to really assess this perspective on an individual campus, but then do some really interesting benchmarking against a peer or aspirational institution to better help understand and sort of judge the position that the institution is in from a process of improving your efforts in the campus safety and health and wellness. The other interesting piece of this is really how you can juxtapose a campus climate survey to some of the data elements and content that you may be delivering at a population level. And I would presume that many of you on the phone today have gone through a campus climate of your own. This has been something that's been recommended as a best practice over the past 3 or 4 years. Some states like Louisiana actually require climate surveys on an annual basis. And in order to serve that, EverFi has actually created a survey platform that helps institutions build the survey, deploy the survey, and then ultimately when the survey wraps up, be able to do the data analysis, recognizing that in many cases the bottleneck for a climate survey is the additional analysis that is required to understand your campus community. And it's again an opportunity to understand sort of the cross-sectional or the environmental impact with additional data, so that you can ultimately see if there's an improvement in what you're providing from a services perspective to the institutional community. And to the last 10 minutes that we have together here, I really want to talk to you about the team that is supporting you all institutionally. And given the perspective of those on the phone, that you may have had some experiences in the past with EverFi or Campus Clarity or Workplace Answers, we are now one aggregated team. And we really think about customer service in two very different perspectives. One, it's the management of our institutional relationships that is really critically important to us. And we have a team of about 30 individuals who are managed by our Vice President of Customer Success, Lisa Havenstock, in our Boston office. And their primary responsibility is to ensure success across not only content usage, but also data analysis as well. And so an individual institution has provided a dedicated customer success manager, and in the event that you choose to partner with us with both your student catalog or student efforts and your faculty and staff, there will be one person representing the institution, so they get a real deep understanding of the institution's priorities across the populations. And they work with you to customize an implementation and training plan for each catalog and each course that you have, working across perhaps content ownership. If you think back across the earlier slide that I showed you, where we had different content ownership, the individuals representing those content ownerships would work closely with our customer success manager to be able to identify their own training priorities across the content ownership that they have. And ultimately, our goal is also to review training goals and to ascertain if you are reaching your goals, and if not, to help you identify the hurdles and help you circumvent those hurdles so that ultimately you are reaching your goals. The second way that we really look at this, and this is fairly new to us, because we recognize as we start to expand the number of individuals that we are supporting from an end user perspective, and the complexity of the training plans that you all are trying to deploy from not just a primary prevention perspective, but from an annual ongoing and a multi-course perspective, there's a great chance that some of those users are going to run into technical issues. And what we wanted to do is subvert those technical issues from your inbox, recognizing that, again, we want you all to be spending your time sort of in our more strategic focus from an institutional perspective. So we've created an end user support process where end users can actually contact EverFi, powered by Blackboard, with questions that are related to IT issues, and they can either do that by dialing 1-800 number or using a chat window within the course, in the courses that they have, and this actually comes through in all of our courses that you use with us. The team, in and of itself, is now over about 100 individuals large. When I first joined EverFi 6 years ago, we were more about 30 or 35 individuals, and now you'll see here that we have a whole host of people whose responsibility ultimately is to make sure that you are successful in reaching your compliance and prevention priorities, from instructional designers who are readily available to listen to the experiences that your learners are having, and those engineers then who actually put together the products and who are
This session is being recorded for audio issue reporting.
Michaela, are you still on?
Yes, I'm here, Jen. I'm not sure
what happened. Are we having
happened.
some problems?
No, I think we're still coming through. It might have been just a glitch.
Okay. Okay, great.
Feel free, anybody.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, if anybody is having any difficulty, please use that question box and represent that, and we'll make sure that we'll do our best to take care of it in the next sort of 10 minutes that we have left. So I was saying, we have, instructional designers and engineers who put the instructional designers sort of thoughts in the content. They are also working on our LMS. I've already mentioned our customer success team that resides in Boston, and we have a whole host of other individuals that we work with, including lawyers and public health experts. Which
audio issue recording has finished.
Hi, Jen. It's just saying that the audio recording stopped, but it doesn't affect your broadcasting. So carry on.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. My apologies for this technical difficulty. So Michaela and I will make sure we assess that on the back end of this, so we recognize what happened. But as I was saying, our team has now expanded, and we have over 10 in-house lawyers who track legal changes at the state and federal level. And these individuals are responsible for ensuring that our content, whether it's related to diversity or opioid prevention education or harassment in California, that the content that we have ensures that you all are meeting the very basic levels of compliance education, whether that's both federal or state. And they also are doing some interesting assessments. We have on a fairly frequent basis webinars, and they'll come in and provide some analysis around what they're seeing and how they're doing. And I would imagine that when we launch our diversity course this summer for faculty and staff, that Sandra will be doing a presentation around the use of that course and how it could actually benefit institutions from a diversity and discrimination perspective. We also have an unbelievable team of public health professionals and otherwise who represent the prevention side of this. And these are individuals who've worked on campuses and have dedicated their careers to improving the public health of our institutions, including Rob Bulow, who leads our team. He has an MPH from Harvard University. We have Nicole Cavallero, who has significant experience at MIT and Harvard as well. And then we also have Dr. Dan Zapp, who actually leads our research arm, and he does a lot of the assessment and trend analysis of our data to better understand how we can improve the outcomes in our courses or help institutions really understand the data analysis themselves. So, as we think about what's realistic in 2017, as we circle back, what we really want to do and have you leave with today is impress upon the fact that, you know, we're in a really interesting place as an organization, and we want you to be able to take part of that. And whether that is through the CPN and the Campus Prevention Network or the blog, or you participate in the Facebook and the online community, we really encourage you to engage and extract in that, you know, in that network, so that you can ultimately get some really useful and purposeful information that helps you all think about the work that you all are doing and addressing some of the most critical and tractable issues that we're all trying to assess on a pretty global perspective. And when we think about the stage and where you are, and, you know, ultimately what we would love to do is have a conversation for you. And if you're in a position where you may feel you're just in the crawl stage, then we can certainly help you there. But if you're thinking that your campus is a little bit more advanced, and certainly there are some that are, we'd love to help have a conversation with you around what type of data analysis are you looking for, and what does ongoing training actually look for you, and for, you know, the 20% or so of institutions who are really now a little bit more forward thinking and a perspective of where they're, you know, they would identify themselves in a running perspective. We'd love to have a conversation with you all. And you know, over the course of this past 45 minutes, I hope that what I've been able to do is provide, you know, a broad perspective of the work that we're doing and how we could represent and support the work that you all are doing from a faculty and staff perspective. And if there's an opportunity to have a conversation with you, or you would like more information on a specific subject matter, I encourage you to report that and throw in that question box. Again, if you're in the crawl stage, type in crawl, and we'll work with you guys on that. If you're in a position where you're in otherwise, we'd be happy also to work with you across that perspective. So to that end, I think, we're wrapping up just a few minutes early, and I would be happy to take any questions, or certainly we can pause here for a few minutes if there are any specific questions. McKaylee, perhaps you can share those with me. Otherwise, we can follow up with you on the back end of this, and McKaylee will be sending out a recording of the webinar and as well the slides. Excellent. Well, really looking forward to connecting with all of you. Again, if there's anything that we can do for you from a resource perspective or otherwise, please choose to submit that in the question box. And within the day or two, you'll get an email with McKaylee with a recording and a copy of the webinar deck. I really appreciate your time this afternoon. Thanks, and have a great day.